okay? Is the mic working? Can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up. No? Yes. Okay, terrific. Well, no, you can't. They can't. Okay, now they can. Okay, wonderful, wonderful. It's a pleasure to be here today. Today we're going to be talking about habit-forming technologies. We're going to go outside just the space of Internet of Things to try and look at how certain products can profoundly change users' day-to-day behaviors. You know, my friend Banny just talked about the importance of changing human behavior and how that can lead to tremendous opportunities. But let's talk about the nuts and bolts. How do we actually change users' day-to-day lives? And so what I'd like to do today is to reflect upon this fact that we have all observed over the past few years here, is that these technologies, this first Internet of a Thing, right, that we carry around with us in our pockets, have profoundly changed users' day-to-day lives. And so what I've done over the past several years is to look for patterns, is to try and understand how some of these best-of-breed companies that are most habit-forming, that have somehow come out of nowhere over the past 5 to 10 years, what made them so successful at changing user behavior. These companies that started out as toys, as these nice-to-haves, the products that weren't even around 5 to 10 years ago, and yet many of us can't stop checking them. Who am I talking about? Who comes to mind? Facebook, right? Who else? Give me some names. Snapchat, thank you. What else? WhatsApp, Instagram, Pinterest, Slack, GitHub. These products, that many of them live in our phone, somehow entice us to action. They have created these habits. So I've looked at these patterns to try and figure out what makes these products so habit-forming and codified what I learned inside this book, Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. Now, unfortunately, I only have 20 minutes. The book is 250 pages long. It's part of a class that I've taught at the Graduate School of Business. It's a lot of information, but I'm going to try and give you a very high-level overview. Unfortunately, I won't have time to dive into many of the examples, but there's lots more examples in the book of how to actually apply this framework. So let's dive into what is a habit. A habit is simply an impulse to do a behavior with little or no conscious thought. Okay? It's about 50% of what we do day in and day out, whether we like it or not, is purely done out of habit. And I believe that we're on the precipice of an age where we can use habits for good. And I'm not alone. Because there's an explosion of companies today, most of them right here in Silicon Valley, that are using the psychology of habit design to help people live happier, healthier, more productive, more connected lives. And that's what I want to help you do today. Now, one disclaimer here. If you're working on the kind of product that isn't used, right? Lots of products aren't actually used by the user. Something that, you know, a metering system that only goes off if something goes terribly wrong, that's not the kind of product that needs a habit. Okay, you may want to go get some coffee outside. This might not apply to you. But if you're working on the product that requires unprompted user engagement, right? Users using these products on their own, changing human behaviors, then you've got to form a habit and you've got to form what I call a hook. A hook is an experience designed to connect your user's problem to your solution with enough frequency to form a habit. Connecting your user's problem to your solution with enough frequency to form a habit. And it's through successive cycles through these hooks that customer preferences are shaped, that tastes are formed, and that our habits take hold. Now, this is a very techie audience. Many of you are taking pictures of the slides. That's fine. I don't mind you taking pictures of the slides, but I will give you all the slides right after my presentation. So don't feel like you have to capture every picture. So what I want to do with the next few minutes is walk you through the 4 fundamental phases of a hook. The first step of the hook is the trigger. A trigger is a call to action. It tells the user what to do next, and they come in 2 flavors, 2 types. We have external triggers, and we have internal triggers. External triggers are things that tell the user what to do next by providing some kind of information. Click here, buy now, play this, a friend telling you about this great new app you should try out. all examples of external triggers. Now, we know all about these external triggers. We see them in our day-to-day environments every day. But what I think product people don't consider enough, and what I found turns out to be absolutely critical in forming these long-term habits, is creating associations with what we call internal triggers. Internal triggers are things that inform the next behavior. They tell the user what to do next, but the information for what to do is not in the external trigger, but instead informed through an association in the user's mind. So what we do in response to being in a particular place, a certain situation, around certain people, or when we experience these emotions, dictates what we turn to next, dictates the solutions that we turn to with little or no conscious thought. Now, it turns out that the most frequent internal triggers are not just these emotions, but a specific type of emotion. I'm referring to negative emotions. So what we do when we're feeling bored or lost or lonesome or indecisive or fearful or uncertain, what we do when we experience these pain points, these negative valence states, as we call them, dictates what we turn to next. You know, one thing that our brain is exceptionally good at is pattern matching. And so when we can figure out the solution to these discomforts, these uncomfortable emotions, we turn to that solution time and time again. We very quickly learn those patterns. Now, some of the research that shows this is the case comes to us from a study that found that people check email more if they're depressed. Think about that for a minute. Why would people suffering from clinical depression check email more? No, it's not because email makes you depressed. That's not what the study found, although sometimes I do feel like that's happening. What this study found, in fact, was that people suffering from clinical depression experience what psychologists call negative valence states. They feel down more frequently than the rest of the population. And so what are they doing to boost their mood, to get out of this negative valence state? They're checking their devices. They're going online more often than the rest of the population. And if we're honest with ourselves, we all do this to some degree, don't we? Let me ask you a question. What website or app do people check when they're feeling lonely? Where do they go? Where do they go? What app? Facebook, of course, right? And what about when you're feeling unsure, uncertain about something? Before you scan your brain to see if you know the answer, what do? You Google it, right? And what about when you're feeling bored, you know, between 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you have that big project you don't feel like working on right now? Where do you go? You check YouTube, you check stock prices, you go onto Reddit, you check sports scores, you check the news. All of these solutions to this painful internal trigger of boredom. We don't like that sensation, and before we're consciously aware of feeling that pain point, we turn to these products and services with little or no conscious thought. They become habits. So what do we do with this? How do we build better products and services knowing about the importance of these internal triggers? Well, it comes down to fundamentally understanding your user's itch. I can't tell you how many times I work with my consulting clients, and I come in and they can tell me all the functional requirements of exactly what their product is supposed to do. But when I ask them about the psychological requirements, when I ask them what itch their product is trying to scratch for their users, how are they trying to improve their users' lives, frequently enough to form these habits, they can't tell me. You've got to understand the internal trigger that occurs frequently enough if you have any hope of forming a habit. The next step of the hook is the action phase. The action phase is defined as the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. The simplest behavior done in anticipation of reward. I want to show you a few examples of several habit-forming products, and I want you to see just how simple these behaviors are. Something as simple as scrolling on Pinterest, or searching on Google, or what could be easier than pushing the play button on YouTube. These incredibly simple behaviors done in anticipation of a reward. There's actually a formula to help us predict the likelihood of these singular behaviors, of these habits, and it comes to us from a researcher at Stanford by the name of B.J. Fogg. Has anybody seen this formula before? Okay, a few of you. Good. So for the most of you, it's very new. It's a very practical formula. Think about the power of this formula. It predicts all human behavior. Fogg tells us that for any human behavior, as represented by B, we only need three things. Sufficient motivation, that's the M. Sufficient ability, ability is how easy or difficult something is to do, that's the A. And the T is the trigger. We just talked about triggers. So any human behavior, your client's behavior, your spouse's behavior, your children's behavior, all human behavior comes down to just three basic elements at the same time: motivation, ability, and triggers. Let's talk about motivation. Motivation is the energy for action, how much we want to do a particular behavior, according to Edward Deci, who you see here. Now, motivation is one of these areas of psychology that we've been arguing about for decades and decades, but Fogg gives us these 6 basic levers that we can pull on to make a behavior more likely to occur by boosting user motivation. Because all of us, as human beings, we seek pleasure, we avoid pain. We seek hope, we avoid fear. We seek social acceptance, and we avoid social rejection. So every bit of ad copy you've ever seen, every television commercial, have all utilized one or more of these 6 elements of motivation. It's a fascinating topic. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into too much depth. There's more in the book. Let's move on to the second part of B equals MAT. The A stands for ability. And this is a big one when it comes to our technology products. It actually matters more than motivation. Ability is the capacity to do a particular behavior. And here again, we have these 6 key levers that we can pull on to make a behavior more likely to occur by increasing or decreasing how much time something takes, how much money something costs, how much physical effort is required. Brain cycles, this is a big one when it comes to our technology products, because it turns out the harder something is to understand, the less likely that behavior is to occur. Social deviance says that we become more likely to do something when we see other people like us doing it. And finally, non-routine says that we become more likely to do something simply for the fact that we have done it before in the past. So the best predictor of what you will do tomorrow is what you did yesterday. Why? Because the more we do a particular behavior, the easier it becomes, and the more likely we are to do it in the future. Let's make this concrete. Fogg puts together this graph that we can use in a product development context when we can ask ourselves, you've developed some great new app, some great new website, some great new product, but darn it, people aren't doing the behavior you want them to do. Why aren't people doing the thing you want them to do? Well, you can ask yourself, does the user have sufficient motivation? High motivation is at the top, low motivation is at the bottom. Does the user have sufficient ability? Is the behavior easy enough to do? If something is easy to do, it's far on the right. If something is difficult to do, it's on the left. And if the user has sufficient motivation, sufficient ability, they cross that blue threshold, and if the trigger is present, the behavior will occur. Every single time, online, offline, doesn't matter. Any human behavior. Let's put this to the test. I want you to think of the last time that a phone rang in your life. Think of a time a phone rang in your life, and you did not pick up the phone. Somebody give me a reason. What's a reason why you didn't pick up the phone? Just shout it out. You're already on the phone, so you hear the call ring. You hear the call waiting, but you're already on a call. It's too difficult to take that call right now. So even if you see who it is and you really want to take that call, you can't take it because you lack ability, even if you have high motivation. What's another reason why you may not pick up the phone? Tell me another reason. Telemarketer. Terrific. It's a telemarketer. So even if you heard the phone ring, the trigger is present. Even if the phone is right there next to you, very easy to pick it up, if you lack motivation, you never cross that threshold, and the behavior does not occur. So let me hop up here because he's signaling that he can't see me. Okay, what's one more reason why you may not pick up a phone because of a trigger? Why may you not pick up a phone because of a trigger? You don't hear it, right? Exactly, the phone's on silent. Has that ever happened to somebody that you want to pick up a call, but the phone was on silent, you never heard it? So think about that. You can have plenty of motivation. The behavior can be easy enough to do, but if you don't hear the phone ring, no behavior occurs. I can't tell you how many times I meet with my clients, and they do a big, expensive design review where we look at every step of the user flow, and I look at the team and I say, where's the trigger? What do you want the user to do here? Because for every human behavior, we always have to have every click, every action, every behavior requires sufficient motivation, ability, and a trigger every single time. Which brings me to the third step of the hook, the reward phase. The reward phase is where the user gets what they came for. It's where their itch is scratched a little bit. Now, when we talk about rewards, we have to start in the brain. And in particular, an area of the brain called the nucleus accumbens, which was first studied by two Canadian researchers in the 1940s who found that when they implanted the brains of lab animals with a tiny electrode, and they allowed the lab animal to self-stimulate, they could push a little lever to send an electrical jolt to this part of the brain, what they discovered was that these lab animals did so incessantly. They would forgo food, they would forgo water, they would run across painful electrified grids just to continue to self-stimulate this part of the brain. In later experiments done on people, they observed similar results. That when people were allowed to stimulate their nucleus accumbens by pushing on a little button, they would do so hundreds of times. Some people had to have these machines forcibly removed from them to get them to stop activating this part of the brain. Turns out that we don't need electrodes to activate this part of the brain, that in fact your nucleus accumbens is stimulated every day from things like luxury goods, junk food, sex, certain chemicals, and of course right there in the center, our technology. All of these things activate the very same part of the brain. Now, Olds and Milner and much of the psychology community believe that the purpose of the nucleus accumbens was to activate pleasure, right? Why else would lab animals and later people incessantly activate this part of the brain if it wasn't because it felt good, right? Not exactly. It turns out that what we now know about how the brain gets us to act is that it doesn't stimulate pleasure per se, but instead it activates what we call the stress of desire. Because what we've now found is that the nucleus accumbens becomes most active in anticipation of a reward, but when we actually get the thing we want, the thing that's going to make us happy and finally make us feel good, that's when the nucleus accumbens becomes less active. So it turns out the way the brain gets us to do these habitual behaviors is by creating this little bit of an itch that we seek to scratch. Have you ever felt that itch? I wonder what's happening on my Facebook account, or maybe I should check on email, or what's happening back at the office, that little bit of an itch I know some of you are feeling right now when I mention it. That's your nucleus accumbens peaking to attention there. And there is a way to supercharge this stress of desire, this wanting, this craving response. Does anybody want to know how? Anybody curious? I'm doing it to you right now. What I did just then was to create a bit of uncertainty, a bit of variability. I took that long pause and I didn't say anything and I asked you a question and some of you perked up. What's going on? Why isn't this guy talking anymore? And that bit of uncertainty, that bit of variability increases our engagement, increases our focus, and it is highly habit-forming. This, of course, comes from the classic work of B.F. Skinner. Many of you remember Skinner from your Psychology 101 class back in college, the father of operant conditioning. Skinner took these pigeons, put them in a little box, he gave them a disc to peck at, and at first, every time the pigeon pecked at the disc, they would receive a reward. They would get a little food pellet. So at first, Skinner proved that he could train these pigeons to peck at the disc whenever they were hungry. But then Skinner did something a little bit different. Skinner introduced a variable reward. So sometimes the pigeons would peck at the disc, nothing would come out. No food pellet. The next time the pigeon would peck at the disc, they would receive a reward. And what Skinner observed was that the rate of response, the number of times these pigeons pecked at the disc, increased when the reward was given on a variable schedule of reinforcement. Why does this happen? Because we now know that variability spikes activity in the nucleus accumbens, creating this craving, this wanting, this desirous response. And so in all sorts of products that we find most habit-forming, most engaging, the things that capture your attention and won't let go, you will find one or more of these three types of variable rewards. Rewards of the tribe, rewards of the hunt, and rewards of the self. Let me introduce these to you very briefly. Rewards of the tribe are social rewards. These are things that feel good, that have an element of variability and come from other people. The search for empathetic joy, feeling good because someone else feels good, cooperation, competition, all examples of rewards of the tribe. Best example online is, of course, social media, right? When I check my Facebook account and I look at my newsfeed, I don't know what photos people might post. What are the comments going to say? How many likes does something get? High degree of variability that comes from other people. Next comes the search for resources, rewards of the hunt. The rewards of the hunt stem from our primal search for food and other material possessions. And of course, in modern day, we buy these things with money. So when people think of gambling, they think of slot machines. Of course, there's variable rewards associated with what makes casinos exciting, if not all-out addictive, is of course the variability of the reward, what you might win when you pull on that slot machine. And we see the same exact psychology at work online. Consider the feed. Why is it today that everything online has this feed? Do you notice that? Everything has a feed today. Let's take a look at Twitter's feed. When I open up my Twitter timeline, I see, okay, that first tweet's not that interesting, the second tweet's not that interesting, but oh, maybe the third tweet's interesting, or the fourth tweet. And what do I have to do? What do I have to do to get more of those rewards? What do I have to do? Scroll. Just keep scrolling. And that scrolling is the same psychology at work that makes pulling on a slot machine so habit-forming. They're both variable rewards of the tribe, searching and never done searching. Which finally brings me to the rewards of the self. It's all about the search for self-achievement. The rewards of the self are things that feel good, that have an element of variability, but don't come from other people and aren't about this information or material rewards. These are intrinsically pleasurable motivators. It's about the search for competency, control, mastery, and completion. So best example online is games, right? When you're playing Dots or the Kardashian game or Candy Crush, you're not necessarily playing these games with other people. You're not even really winning anything. There's no material rewards, but there's something satisfying about getting to the next level, the next accomplishment, the next achievement. And if you say to me, look, Nir, I don't play these games. I'm not much of a gamer. This doesn't apply to me. I bet you play this game every day. Look familiar? Checking those unread messages or finishing the to-dos on your to-do list, or the one that always gets me is that one app notification that I have on my phone that I just have to clear away. These are all examples of variable rewards of the self, the search for mastery, consistency, competency, and control. The point of these variable rewards is to give the user what they came for, to scratch the user's itch, and yet have some bit of mystery, a bit of the unknown associated with what they might find the next time they engage with the product. Which brings us finally to the last step of the hook, the investment phase. The investment phase is where the user puts something into the product in anticipation of a future benefit. It's not about immediate gratification, it's about a future reward. The point of the investment phase is to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook. And it does this in two ways. The first way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass is by loading the next trigger. So for example, when I send someone a message on WhatsApp, there's no immediate gratification, right? I don't get any points, I don't get any badges, nothing really happens when I send someone a notification. when I send someone a message. What I'm doing, though, when I send someone that message, when I invest in the platform, is that I'm loading the next trigger because I'm likely to get a reply. And those replies come coupled with that little icon, that notification that brings me back through the app once again, loading the next trigger, something the user does to bring them back to the app in the future. The second way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook is by storing value. And this is a big deal, particularly in the Internet of Things space. You know, one of the reasons I love working in technology products, as opposed to things in the physical world, is that everything in the physical world depreciates, loses value with wear and tear, right? These chairs, these tables, your phones, your laptops, all of these things with wear and tear lose value. But habit-forming technologies should do the opposite. Habit-forming products should appreciate in value. They should get better with use, and they do it because of this principle of stored value. So for example, the more content I put into iTunes, the better it becomes as my one and only music library. The more data I give to Mint.com or any number of other platforms, the better those products become with my data. They are customized to my needs. The more followers I have on Twitter, for example, I store value in the product in the form of my followers. It gets more and more and more valuable the more followers I accrue. And reputation. So on sites like Airbnb, eBay, TaskRabbit, my reputation literally dictates what I can charge for my goods and services. It's a form of stored value that I can literally take to the bank. And think about it. How easy is it for me to leave one of these platforms, even if a better solution comes about, once I've stored all this value in the form of reputation? Kind of hard to do. Now the product's sticky to leave. So that's it. The 4 fundamental steps of the hook model: the trigger, action, reward, investment, that through successive cycles through these hooks, this is how customer preferences are shaped, how tastes are formed, and how our habits take hold. So that was a lot of information. I apologize. I wish I had some more time. There's a lot more information in the book and on my blog. The book is called Hooked, and my blog is nirandfar.com. But let me leave you with the most important slide of the presentation. These are the 5 fundamental questions that you have to be able to answer if you're building a habit-forming product. If you're designing something that requires unprompted engagement, you have to be able to answer, what's the user's itch? What's the external trigger that brings them to the product? What's the simplest behavior done in anticipation of reward? Is the reward fulfilling and yet leaves the user wanting more? And finally, what's the bit of work the user does to bring them back through the hook in the future? And with that, there's just one more thing I want to discuss. And that is the morality of manipulation. That many of you during the presentation, I hope, were thinking to yourselves, is this okay? Is this kosher? Is this all right to do to people, to use their hidden psychology to change their behaviors? And if you had that response, bravo. I believe that is the appropriate reaction to learning about the power of the psychology of habits. Because let's face it, any time that we are changing user behavior to meet our ends in mind, that, my friends, is a form of manipulation. So we need to be very careful about how we apply these techniques, because the products we're building here in Silicon Valley, these are the things users take to bed with them every night. It's the first thing we reach for in the morning before we even say hello to our loved ones. And as Ian Bogo said, our technologies are quite possibly becoming the cigarettes of this century. So what responsibility do we have as designers, as innovators, as engineers, as product managers, as investors? What responsibility do we have to use these technologies for good? Well, I encourage you to pick one of the world's problems to fix. You know, that is one thing we have no shortage of. I encourage you to engage people in something meaningful, in something important, to help them live happier, healthier, more connected, more productive lives by using the power of habits for good. And to borrow from the words of Gandhi, I encourage you to build the change you wish to see in the world. Thank you very much.